So, the new Stargate show that they were in development of, writer Martin Gero was heading, has been canceled by Amazon Prime, or just Amazon, period. I know I'm late posting this. Truth be told, I didn't want to post right away. Wasn't even sure if I wanted to post right away, but I thought we would explore together through a different angle. In fact, I was actually there for the stream. There's me screaming, "No!" with a lot of O's. Let's talk about what Stargate is in the first place. We'll get to what Stargate is, what it became, and then Limbo, which has been mostly since it's been canceled, the announcement of it being rebooted, and then, of course, the announcement of it being canceled. So what is Stargate? Stargate is a original movie that came out actually in 1990. You know what? I'm gonna double check. 1984. So actually the year after I was born. We had James Spader as Daniel Jackson and Kurt Russell as Jack O'Neill, and they absolutely nailed these roles. They were so much fun. In fact, the actual character of Daniel Jackson inspired another character from your childhood. Even if you've never seen this movie, you've definitely seen this movie.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Now, we've all heard of the legend of Atlantis. Pure fantasy. Well, that is where you'd be wrong.
Yes, in fact, Milo's Thatch was an inspiration after Daniel Jackson. The character Daniel Jackson was such an iconic figure even in the 90s, even though this film has been almost entirely forgotten. And not because it's not a good film, but because the other films by Roland Emmerich had kind of overshined this particular film. You had Independence Day, but it was originally supposed to be a sequel, and then they were going to make a third film as well, which never happened. But their plan was to expand their movie franchise of Stargate. And it didn't happen because two young creators had an idea where they were like, let's make this into a TV show. I think this would actually be much better as a TV show. And so they reached out to a production company, and the rights were bought for the film Stargate to be made into a television show, which, from what I understand, it was a little awkward because this happened actually without the writer and director really knowing. The writers and director, Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin, the apparently companies did this without them knowing. But regardless, what it is, Stargate ran for 10 seasons of a show, Stargate SG-1. While Stargate SG-1 was airing, in season 8, roughly in that time period, Stargate Atlantis was then launched, which ran for 5 seasons. And then while that was running, 2 made-for-TV films and direct-to-DVD films were created, Arc of Truth, Continuum. And then they started making a show which didn't go anywhere, which was called Stargate Infinity. If I remember correctly, it was a cartoon. I think they only made 5 episodes, and then I've never even watched them. I don't even know if I could watch them, but they exist. And then, of course, there was Stargate Universe, which is, when it came out, it was quite controversial for the Stargate franchise at the time, just because Stargate SG-1 had a lot of importance on archaeology, anthropology. It had focus on science and different phenomenons that can happen within science, such as parallel universe, time travel, more metaphysical things that were quite interesting for people who, like science fiction. That is science fiction. And then we had comedy portion because, Richard Dean Anderson kind of reimbursed this character. Stargate was about a group of people who travel through a gate, literally a ring, it's a device that creates wormholes so that you can go through them, and they connect to other gates on other worlds. And a lot of times, a lot of archaeology, anthropology kind of gets involved. Daniel Jackson, who is the archaeology anthropologist, he's a linguist as well, so he connects to other cultures. What's interesting is very rarely does anyone not speak English, which is nice, but anyway. There is a character there, and for a lot of people, they can relate to anything. They can relate to the person being the outcast. They can relate to the science, or at least what did they call it? The gobbledygook, which is what I think Richard Dean Anderson called science talk once. And then you can also relate to just the exploration, the adventure, the fun. There's just a lot of fun in it. Where does that leave us? So what ended up happening is Stargate Universe, as it came out, was a little controversial during its period of time. Obviously, that wasn't the only reason why the Stargate franchise kind of it kind of fell because MGM went bankrupt, and then Stargate was kind of in limbo for God knows how long. But Stargate Universe kind of was taking on inspirations from several different shows. So during this period of time, shows like The Office was doing really well. At least the BBC version of The Office had came out in 2001, and then ran for 2 seasons. And that was it. And it did so well that obviously The Office, the American show, came out. And then after the BBC, The Office came out, was a huge wonder. They decided to pick the Americas. Obviously, the American version, The Office, ran from 2005 to 2013. Then we had Lost that had aired in 2004. So there was an era of television that was more serious. Long were the days that people stopped watching comedies or sci-fi. I mean, keep in mind, during this period of time when Stargate was airing, Star Trek was actually starting to have a little bit of a downgrade, like a little bit of a downslope of interest. And then actually, during its run, Stargate SG-1 actually outperformed Star Trek several times. And then also, there was a huge phase where there wasn't much coming out with Star Wars. There might have been the Clone Wars show that was coming out, but there was nothing. And so Stargate was in a really good sweet spot to really just thrive. And it did. I know a lot of people growing up who would watch occasional episodes because it was on television and they found it interesting. And I think what people forget is there are obviously people who are more devoted, people probably more like me, but also though I'm not watching an episode every night. So maybe I'm not that devoted, but I'm still quite a fan and I'm in the know. And then there are people who knew Stargate growing up, but they haven't seen an episode in years. And so actually, I was recently looking at the statistics of Stargate and how it had done. Now, we'll get in that in a second, but basically what ended up happening after the cancellation of Stargate Universe, they were planning to make an Atlantis film. That never happened. Actually, I think they were planning to make a film of Atlantis and then make a 6th season. Both did not happen. Universe was obviously supposed to go longer. It did end on a cliffhanger. And Stargate SG-1, I think they were also in the middle of making at least another movie. And because of MGM's crash, if you will, everything kind of became limbo. I don't remember much about Stargate Universe, and in fact, I'm going to rewatch it soon, but do remember liking the second half of the second season of the Stargate Universe show. It was different, but it was starting to get its feet. I don't know, you kind of get the lore, but it was more about treachery, and it kind of was like Once Upon a Time before Once Upon a Time, if that makes sense. But it was that era of television, it was kind of like, a CW show on some levels. Obviously, no offense to one of my favorite shows, but it was also just that era of television that had a mood, and that was because of what executives wanted to see, what was pushing, what was trending, etc. But I digress. So Stargate was in limbo for 15 years, 14 years, 13 years. And apparently when Amazon did pick up Stargate, one of the main shows that they had considered, one of the franchises that they picked up with MGM, Stargate was one of the ones that kind of stood out to them as an opportunity. And when you have numbers that Stargate did, and also just the fact that if you're an executive, you haven't heard of Stargate, never watched it, it's potential that you probably know somebody who's at least watched it or aware of it. So it wasn't a lost cause, but obviously they didn't know where to put it. They were like, I don't know how we can create this. Apparently Joe Flanagan, who played as Commander Shepard in Stargate Atlantis, had been trying to actually get something going with Stargate. Didn't happen. And then also Brad Wright made a pilot, presented it to Amazon, and they were like, no. So a lot of people did really want to get Stargate kind of going again, but it just wasn't the right time. There weren't the right shows, etc., etc. But then Amazon started seeing the numbers. Amazon had said that Stargate is one of their best performing shows, and so they started thinking about it. And Martin Gero had been working on a pilot for a new show for about 18 months before, it had been announced. So Martin Gero played a huge role in Stargate. According to his IMDb on Stargate Atlantis, he had been executive producer, co-executive producer, supervising producer. I do know he was also a writer. And he did about 80 episodes with Stargate Atlantis. Some of the best episodes at Atlantis, Martin Gero had written. Stargate Universe, he was a consulting producer for 8 episodes. And he also was a little bit involved with Stargate SG-1. And since then, he has written several other things, such as Quantum Leap. He had been the executive producer for Line Spot. I guess he was the executive producer for 100 episodes. So, and also he was a consulting producer at 13 episodes of the show called Dark Matter. And so it seemed when it was announced that Martin Gero and executive producers Brad Wright, Joe Mallozzi, as well as consulting producers Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin, were all coming together to do this show. It 100% seemed smart. In fact, Amazon was wondering how we could announce this, and they allowed Brad Wright, Joe Mallozzi, Martin Gero to announce this with the fans. They went on a pre-recorded video, from what I understand, that it was pre-recorded, I should say, with Darren Sumner of GateWorld, the biggest news forum in the know information place for Stargate, and David Reed of Dial the Gate. David Reed is also, for a very long time, was connected deeply with GateWorld. From what I understand, David and Darren have been friends since childhood or high school. So to approach the fans this way was very smart, because you automatically are going to sell it to the fans because you know that it's safe. It is a safe production. Think about it this way. With Buffy New Sunnydale, it was smart when they produced it by actually getting Sarah Michelle Gellar on the show and knowing that even though it wasn't announced yet, your favorites would show up in the show somehow. And actually, James Masters had announced that he was going to be showing up somehow. It just, they only made the pilot. And then it was canceled because, one, from what I understand, the executives actually didn't understand Buffy at all. Surprise, surprise. But also, though, they said that they're interested in making new Buffy, just not this one. And I was thinking about this the other day. So this is where we're getting into where we are now and the discussion at hand. I had been thinking lately about what is wrong with the film, television world right now. To me, it seems that the biggest problem is that Hollywood, and I wouldn't say Hollywood because obviously not every production company exists in Hollywood, but Hollywood as an executive group, let's just say it that. The executive groups who head these streaming services, these big film companies, they are looking at statistics. And back in the day when, Stargate was airing, you would get understandings of how well a show was doing because cable would announce their viewerships. So for example, one of the reasons why Voyager didn't take far, Star Trek Voyager didn't take very far, was because the viewership wasn't there as much as it was for Deep Space Nine or the Next Generation. And a lot of people still say that is kind of also the reason why certain shows, even though they could go far, they don't go far. So where does that leave Stargate? Well, when shows start switching from viewership of how many people buy merchandise, you have to rely on the streaming statistics. If you're not looking at cable announcements of what shows were people actually sat through, then again, you have to look at how many people got a subscription for a streaming service based on one title's announcement. So for example, with Bridgerton, the 3rd season probably saw a lot of people, one, because it's obviously not all based on subscriptions, but it's also based on how much it's trending online. So for example, if I make a X post about it, an X post seems so stupid to say, or if it's about a reel being posted to Instagram or a TikTok or whatever it is, those numbers are fed into the algorithm based on the words that you say. Because even if you use captions or not, The words are still going to be monitored, if you will. And then that information will be sent back to those executives. And they'll be like, oh, more people want to see this. Stargate had seen in the last couple of years, and Amazon had said this, that they really like the numbers that they are seeing from Stargate. It does really good for them consistently. So, for example, let's just pull something up here. So here's where we are. This is by Flix Patrol, which again, I don't know how reputable this is, but if they're putting out numbers like this, I assume they're seeing it. So top 10 American, Amazon Prime. So overall, off campus, Spider-Man Noir, Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan, Ghost War, The Boys. It's not like that. Battleship, Citadel, Despicable Me, Regretting You, Invincible. Then we have movies. Tom Clancy, Battleship, Despicable Me, Regretting You, Last Night on Earth, Major Pain, Norbit, One Battle After Another, Serenity, Aquaman, and The Lost Kingdom. Then down here, we have Off Campus. This is for television shows again. Off Campus, Spider-Man Noir, The Boys, It's Not Like That, Citadel, Invisible, The Summer I Turned Pretty, Fallout, Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan, When Death Comes Knocking. So I said to myself, okay, there's got to be statistics about specifically how Stargate is doing. So these are the top 10 streaming overall. So we have obviously The Boys top right now. This is the only Amazon Prime one that is carrying. We have ones that are more consistency. Like Bluey, that's going to be consistent. And that is found on Disney+. Then you have Family Guy. Is this ever going to not be popular? Probably not. Which is Hulu, which Disney Plus owns Hulu. Then we have The Big Bang Theory. Again, you ask yourself, will this never not be interesting? The answer is no. And this is done by HBO Max, which remember, somebody bought out HBO Max. I believe it was Netflix or something. So technically, this is Netflix. Then we have SpongeBob SquarePants, which is the one thing Paramount Plus has on all of these other dudes, okay? Again, I'm still asking myself, what are the statistics on Stargate? So I found this one website. This is called Television Stats. It gives you information about how well Stargate is doing. Now, as of May 30th, 2026, it is quiet. It is a 1.6. Right now, it is ranked as the most popular television show. So think about all the television shows that exist. It is rated as the 427th. So if we open up this tab, we look at the top 10 shows. Euphoria, Spider-Man Noir, Off Campus, The Boys, Half Man, Love Island USA, yikes, Dalton Ranch, which I'm not surprised about, Paramount Plus, and we're going down, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, Life Happens with Andy Cohen. Now keep in mind, where is the sci-fi in here? Not saying that The Boys don't consider to be sci-fi, but it's not like stereotypical sci-fi. There's a lot of adventure in here. We have The Mandalorian, classic. We go down, we have more of the world of Yellowstone, Madison, Peaky Blinders, The Sopranos, which apparently is one of the best shows of all time. And then we have Daredevil Born Again, which is doing really well for Disney+. And we keep going. Interview with the Vampire. And we go down and we see finally the first Star Wars Maul Shadow Lord, which I guess I didn't even know it was out yet. So that's nice. And we keep going. So for example, Star Wars, 80. Now, keep in mind, we know Star Wars isn't doing the best right now. We have Supernatural. Again, I guess that could also go next to The Boys because of more mystical and less about science or science fiction, if you will. But we keep going down. Of course, Bridgerton is 105, and then when the next season comes out, it will bump. We just know it will, friends. And we keep going. We have the Marvel's Punisher, which I've heard really good things about. We keep going. How I Met Your Mother, 148, which, are you surprised? I'm not surprised. And we keep going all the way down. Now, obviously, 427 is a little bit down on the list, but you got to think about it this way. These shows, a lot of them, brand new. A lot of them. Think about all of the shows that exist, that have ever existed. And this is sitting at 427. That's not bad, especially for a show that has been out of publishing for, 15 years now? 14 years? However long it's been, right? Last aired 2007. Now, this is Stargate Issue 1. This is not Stargate Universe, Stargate Atlantis. Okay? But this show, this one here, is the one that kind of carries the Stargate franchise. I'm not saying that it is the only one that exists, but it kind of carries it. It's gotten the most amount of reputation. It's followed behind itself for 10 seasons, which is quite impressive because I don't think any of the Star Trek shows have actually ran for 10 seasons. So keep that in mind. So we're looking at this. It is number 4 on Sci-Fi. Okay? It is number 9 on Showtime. It is ranked 116 on Sci-Fi in general. So if we go down, it's going to be in here. Okay, so Stargate, SG-1, has beaten the following. Bleach, The Legend of Korra, Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, Xena the Warrior Princess, Vision Quest, which to be fair, this isn't out yet, so hold your tongue. It's beating Deep Space Nine, which is objectively probably one of the best Star Trek shows. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's one of the best. It has beaten Star Wars, The Bad Batch, Supergirl on CW, Percy Jackson, and the Olympians, which, Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which did really well in its run, Heroes, Gotham, Marvel's Jessica Jones. A lot of these obviously are older shows, but a lot of them are well loved and have taken quite a bit with the fans, people who enjoy more sci-fi. The fact that Stargate is able to beat even some of these Marvel shows is impressive. That it's able to beat certain animes, for example, like Naruto. It's beating Naruto, dude. So that's impressive. 95 on action, number 4 on sci-fi. Let's look at the sci-fi. Like, we have The Expanse. It's number 2 today. What was that? It was number 4 2 days ago. Number 4 2 days ago. Today, it is number 2. Battlestar Galactica. Forget you. This means nothing. Almost. To top this far when it's not even a new show is impressive. Then we go to what? Showtime? It is top 10. It is today 6 under Homelander, Twin Peaks, Shameless. And underneath, it's beating Dexter, New Blood. It's beating The Tudors. It's beating Weeds. This is good. These are good numbers. And then it shows you this score, overall interest. So I was looking at this one year. I was like, well, what was announced in November? Obviously, the new show. So it had like a stagnant, consistent talk rate. Even though it wasn't every day, people were still talking about it. Over here, we had 500, 600, and then peak 35 on the buzz score. So it raised high. 35 on the buzz score, 8.4 on its announcement day says a lot, considering you got to think about it this way, because when you imagine what is probably the average Stargate viewer, what do you kind of imagine the person to look like? The fact that it was able to score 35 on the scale of buzzworthy on the internet says probably a lot more than you think. Based on what the average Stargate viewer you think is, you're probably wrong. And of course it goes down after a couple of days, but it consistently brings up a little bit more interest. Over here we're having 400, 500, 600. Over here we're having 400, 300, 300, 400. So we're getting consistent interest. People are engaging. People want more. And then what happened here in February? Well, that was Stargate returning to Netflix. And it returned to Netflix on February 15th, which was a big deal. Thanks, Darren, for announcing this. This is a big deal because Netflix, as we've seen, based on the statistics we were just looking at, is the biggest bringer of money. You know what's so funny? I have to say this right now. Anytime I see images of Stargate, it's always this era of Stargate. And I know because this is Corbin Nemec? How do you say that? He was only in Stargate for one season. Well, Daniel Jackson died in season 5, and Jonas, his character, Corbin Nemec, came in and played for one season. And what's funny is anytime you see any kind of promotional material, that's what the word I was looking for, promotional material, it's always this season 6 reboot promotional material that was created. So I don't know what happened. Maybe they had to really push marketing during this period of time because people weren't taking well to Michael Shank's Daniel Jackson leaving. But I just laugh because even now, when we get images of Stargate, it is this image. And it's only from 6th season and that's it. But anyways, that's just a side note. We're getting back to here. So we see a huge jump here, okay, because of the announcement. So you assume that's just the fans. But then Netflix brings back Stargate, okay? which jumps that score. But it consistently brought it up again. So we were what? We were down at 300 and now we're back at 64. Obviously, this one brought it up to 35. So obviously, the announcement of the new show was much more buzzworthy. But now that I've said all that, but here's what's interesting, okay? New show instantly tapers off, but it still has like a little bit. So let's just say this is just the average fan base. It's you and me down here. We're in the trenches. We're like, guys, listen, like new Stargate. People are like, okay, cool. I don't know what that is. In fact, I was talking to my coworker and she wasn't even born yet when this film came out. I was like 1. So, there's no way I would have watched that myself personally. But keep this in mind. My friend from work who had never even heard of this movie, we sat down to watch this and she was like, she's not that kind of person to like anything outside of horror. She loves horror. And when I said this is probably one of my favorite films of all time, she was like, okay, we'll watch this, but you have to watch this with me. And I'm like, sure, whatever. And so we're watching this. And after a while, she was like, you know what? I'm not paying attention. This is actually a really good film. And maybe I should pay attention more. Now, when I tell you this person is picky. I'm not joking. This person falls asleep in theaters for some of their favorite films, but they were surprised how much they were enjoying this Stargate film. And in fact, there were many times where she'd be like, why did this happen? And I'm like, oh, well, it was because of this happened, which I think it was just because there was talking in the background or you weren't really paying attention. But in the film, she realized how much she was actually enjoying the film. And she understood why it meant something to me. And when I explained the original Stargate film to people, they're like, there's something like that exists? Like, I don't think Stargate has a viewership problem. I think it has a marketing problem. This is where I'm trying to get. I know I've been rambling for like 40 minutes at this point, but Stargate has a marketing problem. Because if you think about it this way, when the film came out, even though it did really well that year the film came out, keep in mind, it was the 90s. Films that came out in 1994, okay? Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Interview with the Vampire, okay? Interview with the Vampire. Star Trek Generations, okay? You think about how many Star Trek fans were just waiting for that film to come out. We had The Naked Gun, which I think is the final insult, so it was the last one that came out. Okay, you know what? I lied. I guess 1994 didn't do that well for films in general. But I do think that when the film came out, even though it did get a lot of awards from what I understand. So when the film came out in 1994, it had received a Saturn Award for the best science fiction film that had come out. And that was a big deal, the fact that it aired the same year as Star Trek Generations. It outdid Star Trek Generations, okay? The Sci-Fi Universe magazine, USA 1995, rated it as the best science fiction film, best supporting actress in a genre film, the best special effects in a genre motion film. Golden Screen in Germany, 1995, gave it a Golden Screen Award. The Hugo Awards, 1995, nominated for Best Dramatic Presentation. Saturn Awards, 1995, nominated for Best Costumes and Best Special Effects, which is fascinating that is the case. But I guess to be fair, they did win the best science fiction film, even though they didn't get the awards for best costumes and best special effects. And then Motion Picture Sound Editors USA 1995 nominated it for Golden Reel Award for best sound editing and sound effects Foley. This is a big deal, this film. It's so much so that it inspired probably one of the best films that came out in the early 2000s for children, The Atlantis, The Lost Empire. So what happened? Why did people just stop talking about it? Well, I think there's difference between film science fiction, at least in the 90s, I would say, versus television science fiction. Like, for example, a lot of people probably went to the theaters to see Star Trek films, but have probably never sat down to actually ever watch Star Trek. So when The Wrath of Khan comes out, even though, there were a lot of fans that could explain it, there were probably also a lot of new people into it. Like, for example, Star Wars did really well because it was all film. There wasn't television for it. And I think television has this weird way in the past of being completely separate from film. And it's not like that anymore because now everything's on a streaming service. And whether you watch a television show or a movie, it's all on a streaming service. So it's all fair game. And most people probably watch television now because it's a lot more binge-worthy than, say, a one-off film. And then you have shows that turn into films now because, the show did really well. What we do see is that television has its own world, oftentimes, historically, not as of late, because obviously now everything is streaming based. So where does this leave us? Well, I think what it is because Stargate as a show didn't have as much trend factor as films did. So when it translated to the television, which it did really well for when it did, even the movies that came out later, Continuum and Arc of Truth, those films probably would have brought in a huge wave of fans, new fans, I should say, if it were not for the fact that those movies are heavily show carried. So they became premiered on television, direct to DVD release, which is not good for marketing. And so here's where we are now. The announcement of bringing Stargate out to the fans first was very smart because, as Darren Sumner said on his stream yesterday, fans are the ambassador to Stargate. We're the ones talking to our friends. Like, for example, showing my coworker the original Stargate film that she had never seen. We're the ones that are going to talk about it. We're going to get people interested. We're going to get people to be like, listen, it's on streaming services. It's on Netflix. Go watch it, kind of thing. But here's the thing, and I think it's something that streaming service executives probably don't want to admit. They recognize that it's not always a great bid these days for anything to watch, because as much as you put faith in something, if you don't immediately see the numbers, it's canceled. Look at Starfleet Academy. The first season aired, okay? And within a week, they announced the second season's coming out. And then within the same week, they said the second season's going to be the last season ever produced. Like, they didn't even give that show air. They just determined that within 1 week, it wasn't good enough, and therefore it's canceled. Which is odd. You know, it's like Buffy New Summerdale. They watch one pilot, and they're like, yeah, no. Which happens all the time. That's just Hollywood business. But it's something that because they said, we know the fans are going to love this, but we're more worried about new viewership. No. And I think when you make a lot of decisions based on whether or not you're going to get more people streaming something, or because like really the money that they make are through maybe lower scale accounts. Like, for example, the people who decide to take advertisements in their streaming services, which, by the way, at that point, just get cable. But anyway, they're thinking about most of the time people who are going to sign up, which is one of the reasons why Netflix decided that they removed the ability for people outside of the house to share passwords, because they didn't like the fact that they were losing money based on everybody sharing passwords. And Netflix is obviously the biggest company that exists with streaming. You know, all these other companies, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, HBO Max, Hulu, these companies followed suit after Netflix decided to front run this. So the fact that the biggest company, Netflix, when it brings back Stargate onto its franchise, immediately sees the numbers. That can make Amazon a little sweaty because they're like, well, we want people to see us more. Which, to be fair, if you were really worried about that, why would you release it out to Netflix? But I don't think that's actually the reason. I think the reason is simply this. I found one article that gives out demographic numbers, because when this was announced yesterday from Variety, so we're going to pull this up. All right. So, wow. Continue without disabling. Bite me. So obviously the Variety broke the news. Thanks, Joe Otterson. Okay. So this is the biggest article here. According to an individual with knowledge of the situation, Amazon executives were concerned that Gero's take on the series would not have a broad appeal beyond the franchise already dedicated fan base. So you and me, they were worried that you and me were not good enough. But it is kind of a silly thing to say, because anything you make, film, television, whatever, it is a gamble, you know? When you make video games, if you're an indie creator, it's a gamble. And it's also your duty to market yourself. Amazon has all the money in the world. They announced the fact that they're bringing all these directors back, which you know they'd have a good paycheck, on top of announcing some of the special effects creators that they were going to have, which was in March that they announced that they would have bigger names within the 3D modeling community to take on some of these roles in the show. It's already a gamble that you're willing to invest that much and then cancel it before even a show has been put out. But regardless, they're worried that new fans will be put off and that they won't like it enough to stream with them, simply put. Because think about it this way. You might assume, let's just assume that everybody in the world has a streaming service. And let's just assume that Amazon's worried that there's not enough people streaming on Amazon and there's too many people streaming on Netflix. Which, again, why would you release out Stargate anyway? But anyway, perhaps their thinking is, we release Stargate on Netflix, it'll get those people interested into Stargate. And then once we remove Stargate from Netflix, they'll move over to Amazon Prime in hopes that you'll get new viewers from Netflix on Amazon Prime. Maybe that's why they did that. Who knows? Maybe it's the long game. But regardless, okay, we're just assuming because we don't actually know that information. But you're assuming that the demographics that you want are not watching Stargate. So I tried to find, what are the demographics then that people that watch Stargate? So I found one article. Only one, not that one. Okay, well, I guess I did find two things. So first of which is, in 2006, Allison posted this Save SG-1 campaign Stargate fan demographics survey. And the idea, obviously, is to figure out who's actually watching Stargate so that it looks, wow, look at that, shareholders. We're an attractive group of people. We have all the age demographics who are sitting and watching Stargate, so let's go. But this was in 2006. And I wanted to see if the information would show up. I clicked this. It did take me somewhere else, and there was no information. So I don't think the statistics were ever posted. But what about right now? Like, what are we seeing? So I found another article, which again, this one is a little bit older, I think. So the Stargate Atlantis audience in Germany, which again, I don't know why it's so hard to find the statistics, but anyway, this is from Macass, which I want to keep in mind that even though this exists, oh no, it was 2026. So I guess this was this year. This was this year that they posted this. So keep that in mind. Now I want you to think about this. This is just Germany, okay? It is not other countries involved in this. This is just Germany, and this is just for Stargate Atlantis. So that does kind of make you raise your eyebrow a little bit, but apparently the survey was posted this year, so keep that in mind. With 179.7K identified fans, Stargate Atlantis is a major audience in Germany, which apparently Germany actually loves Stargate. So the audience is predominantly male, 72%, with an average age of 40 years old, which are concentrated in these cities, which I am not going to say because I might offend somebody. And it is above average scores in patriotism and early adopter standout. Interesting. And it is a refreshed monthly from search and browsing signals. So again, when you and I post things to X, when you and I post things to TikTok, when we Google something, all this information is being fed to a higher number. Now, keep in mind, when you have a VPN, you can lie. But let's just say that these companies are assuming that you are who you say you are, or based on your social media accounts, they can kind of figure it out. I mean, think about how many people probably don't actually put their information in there. But anyways, let's reopen this again, because there was one other thing I wanted to show you. So when they were looking at the demographics, they saw that only 28% were women watching Stargate Atlantis. And again, the average age is 40 years old. So obviously I am not the average. I am a woman. I'm not 40 years old. But I can say this. They are probably worried about the following. Because again, these are executives and they want to make money, and this is just how it works. They're thinking 40 isn't a bad age, but it's people who are going to retire. And what we want is how to get younger people involved in the show. Now, not assuming that, there aren't people who are young and women who don't watch the show. And not to say that there isn't older people not watching the show. No, that's an average. So an average number, it could be a range. It could be between like 28 to 67. And the average between all of that is 40% or 40 years old. And out of that 28 to 68, whatever range I said, 72% of it is male. Now, a good portion of that, 28% obviously, were women. So out of that average, 28%, obviously, as we see here, is women, or people who identified as women. And they're 40-year-olds, apparently. Average age is 40, right? It's not saying that all 72% of the males are 40 years old. No, it's saying the average age overall between men and women are 40 years old. So they're looking at younger women. They're looking at women in general. They're looking at the age range of males that tend to be also only 40 and not males who are 15 or whatever. So they're looking at shows that are the top ones, like Euphoria, The Boys. They're looking at shows like Family Guy. These shows that consistently do well and provide a good output, regardless of age range, right? Stargate does not perform in those areas, at least not in Germany, right? Again, this is a statistic from Germany, not necessarily from the Americas. Basically, they're telling us that this isn't good enough, that only 28% of people who watch Stargate, the 28% of women who are 40 years old that watch Stargate, that's not good enough. They're also saying the 72% of the male demographic that watches Stargate is not good enough. So why is that? Well, got to think about it this way. Women had a good foot in heading a lot of some of the biggest sci-fi franchises. Think about it this way. Lucille Ball was the reason why Star Trek even happened in the first place. Historically, women that have taken places of science positions have oftentimes been overlooked. Or a male sometimes takes their good for themselves and then make their own name on the publication. Obviously, that did not happen with Stargate. But women have historically been uninvolved with STEM, which obviously is science involved in there. When it comes to watching science, there's a lot of women who watch Star Trek. In fact, the character of Spock was so well received by women. And then obviously, Kirk was very attractive. William Shatner did really well. So what about Stargate? Well, I think it's also partly because the representation. Think about it this way. Stargate is, like someone was saying the other day, they're like, Amazon doesn't want Stargate woke. Or Amazon demands Stargate woke. It's always the argument of wokeness. And I'm like, that is such a tired argument. Come up with something else. It's so silly. I don't think wokeness is the problem. I don't think it's the problem. I think when you look at these demographics, people assume it's the problem. No, I think the problem is the marketing. If you want women who are young, men who are young, to watch Stargate, you have to market in a way that it is attractive to these demographics. That is a marketing problem. It is not a writing problem. There are absolutely strong women characters in Stargate. There's a reason why Sam Carter is still well loved. Amanda Tapping, who is a Canadian actress, which oftentimes people say that, actress and actors from Canada do nothing and they have to move to the United States. That is not true. This show was built on the backs of a lot of Canadians, and all the shows, I should say. Martin Gero is Canadian. That is not the problem. The problem is marketing. If you are not seeing an uptake of people watching Stargate, you have to ask yourself, why are women not watching Stargate? Think about it, okay? Just think about it. Now, I think there could be several reasons to this. As soon as you involve military, for everything that is going on geopolitically, people start sweating because they're like, guns bad, that kind of thing. That's not this show. Yes, there was a lot of praise for the amount of heavy lifting that this show did when it came to the military involvement, but it's not the focus. There's a lot of focus in this show on the science, on the archaeology, on the mythology of the show, and just general human interaction and culture. I mean, in some ways, I'm not saying Daniel Jackson is not masculine, but he does represent some stereotypical feministic traits. And these are things that are attractive to women. Daniel Jackson did so well, probably for both men and women. Daniel Jackson, the person who is obviously automatically a male, but he's kind of like ostracized from his own community, the archaeology community. But he's a sensitive guy and he understands the moral ramifications for a lot of decisions, and he gets the girl. Who doesn't want that? And then Jack, the other character, who is more for those more masculine characters. And maybe that's what it is because when you present these two characters that are probably the most iconic, not that they are trumping everybody else, that's not what I mean, but that people recognize the most because they were in the original film. I think their worry is Amazon, is that there's gonna not be a widespread because these streaming services tend to focus more on, they look at the statistics they're seeing and they're worried that these demographics over here are not going to be looked at, they probably even look at different ethnicities, how many people who are of color watch Stargate and how often they watch Stargate. Not to say that those people don't exist, but again, if they're looking at an average, and again, the statistics from Germany, an average of 72% males at the age of 40 years old, they're also looking at the demographic of where those people live and their ethnicities. And when they are asking these questions, they're thinking numbers. They're thinking, will this bring in more streaming people? Will this bring in more buzz interest? Can we outdo Bridgerton? Like, those are questions they're asking. Even though Stargate has nothing to do with Bridgerton, they're thinking Bridgerton is a women-dominated show. How can we get the women to watch Stargate? So when they canceled this show, they basically looked at Mark Gero and said, what you're writing is not enough for these other demographics. And they're not thinking these demographics we care about. They're thinking about these demographics that will bring us money, which is an unfortunate outlook on life because you will never appease everybody. I know that you want more money. I know that that's what you're thinking because you're looking at the average. And if the average is not good enough, then no, thank you. It's not about equality. It's about money. And so all this to say, where does this lead us now? At first, I was like really sad, kind of at a loss of words. Now I'm more like, this is a really poor money choice because of exactly what I just said. You cannot appease everybody. You cannot get a show that brings in everybody unless you decide to try to put everybody in there and it's all equal and it represents every statistical person that exists, the person that's quiet, the person that's loud, the person that lives in poverty, the person that doesn't live in poverty. Like, you would have to stretch this so far that when you do that, because you have all these requirements and lists of things that you want to see in a show, it almost becomes stretched then because it's really hard to reach everybody. A lot of things that did really well, they didn't reach everybody. Ben-Hur did not reach everybody, but it's a reason why it's still considered one of the best epics of all time. Same with Citizen Kane. There is a reason why that film did well. Did it reach everybody? No. But if people watch it, regardless of their ethnicity, their gender, their religious beliefs, it does well for a reason. When you start worrying about statistics because of streaming numbers and less because of how can we just tell a good story, that's where you miss the mark. And again, if you're having a demographic issue, it's a marketing issue. To which, why then? Because you're clearly recognizing that there's a marketing issue. So let's reach out to the fans. Are you saying that the fans didn't do enough marketing? Like, that's obviously an assumption, so don't take that to heart. But it does make you question, what do you expect? You marketed this concept of this show doing well to the fans, and you knew how to present these concepts. And now you're saying that we actually just don't believe that this show can perform to the demographics we want to see, which is, it's like, how to describe, it's just anxiety. It's fears about things that don't exist now. Just because you think this show does well for this and we see the statistics, like, I'm not saying that they don't have the numbers. I know they have the numbers, but to assume that you won't have a new wave of numbers based on this show coming out it's foolish. And it's anxiety that is based in no actual merit. Assuming that maybe they used an AI model to, branch out this information. Maybe they just went to ChatGPT. They're like, so here's the script. What do you think? And ChatGPT's like, oh, not sure. I'm just joking. I'm not saying that's what they did. Imagine. I don't want to. The problem is that humans are more than just a statistic. People will surprise you all the time. Just because Stargate maybe is not reaching the current demographics that you want to receive right now doesn't mean that when you are marketing this show, it won't reach them at all. Think about it this way. Rings of Power, the Lord of Rings show. I love Lord of the Rings. It's one of my favorite film franchise of all time. I will never watch that show. I'm a demographic. Think about how many people that are like me that will never watch that show. But yet it's still performing well. Why? Because of marketing, because of, well, it's on, let's just watch it. Those kind of people. People who are like, I just want anything that's Lord of the Rings, let's watch it. Because that's what they assume. They think the average fan of anything, like me being a fan of Stargate, we're just going to watch anything they throw at us. So, it doesn't matter if they scrap this script of Martin Gero's, because whatever they come up with, we'll probably just watch it anyway. And that's not true. They missed the mark here, and they made a bad decision here. But anyways, I'm going to stop rambling about this. I just think that Stargate needs better marketing, not a better script. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Sarah. I am the host of Sarah's Spare Corner. Sarah's Spare Corner encompasses gaming, as well as arts, crafts, and various different forms of creativity. Additionally, I like sharing theories, concepts, and ideas, as I am a philosophy major. And when I'm not bored, I travel places, and I might post about it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd love to hear. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye. Bye now.